The first time I rode into Willow Creek with her at my side, the whole town seemed to lean back on its heels and squint at me like I had lost every ounce of sense the Lord had given me, and maybe to them I had, because men like me weren't supposed to throw their lot in with a woman like her. My name carried weight across the plains, not because I was a wealthy man in the sense of gold coins jingling in my pockets, but because my family's cattle grazed on land that stretched so far a man could ride 2 days and never see the end of it, and that kind of reach gave a cowboy a reputation whether he wanted it or not. Folks in Willow Creek knew I was a man who could buy and sell without blinking, who could weather the kind of losses that would ruin another rancher for life, and maybe that's why the laughter felt so sharp in my ears that morning, because they thought I was a fool to tie myself to a woman who brought no dowry, no family name worth speaking of, no beauty that fit the polished stories men told in saloons about the kind of wives ranchers should choose. She sat quiet in the saddle beside me, her hands gripping the reins so tight her knuckles were white, her bonnet tipped low over her face as if she wanted to disappear into the folds of it, but I saw her trembling, saw the way her shoulders hunched as the chuckles rolled out from the porch of the general store and the blacksmith's forge and the wide steps of the saloon. To them she was nothing worse than nothing, because she carried a past they all thought they knew, whispers of abandonment, of hardship, of nights spent scrubbing floors in exchange for bread crusts, of men who had treated her cruel and left her with nothing but shadows in her eyes. They thought she was unworthy of a man with land and cattle, unworthy of even the smallest claim to respect, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't see, was how much worth she carried inside her, worth they'd never measure because it wasn't something you could weigh on a scale or write into a ledger. She had a strength that didn't announce itself in words or smiles, but in the way she endured, in the way she kept standing even when every hand seemed raised against her, and I knew that strength because I'd seen it with my own eyes the night I first found her. It was the dead of winter then, a storm raging over the prairie like the sky had torn itself open, and I'd been out riding to check on a calf that had gone missing from the herd. Snow stung my face, the kind of cold that gnawed through wool and leather until it reached the bone, and I remember thinking no soul would be fool enough to be out in weather like that unless life had cornered them into it. That's when I saw her, huddled in the broken shell of an old barn at the edge of my land, her body wrapped in rags, her lips blue, her eyes wide like a deer caught in the lantern's glow. She had nothing but a threadbare satchel, and in her hands she clutched a small piece of cloth like it was the last anchor to the world, and when I asked her what she was doing out there she could barely speak, her teeth chattering too hard to form words. I carried her back to the ranch house that night, set her near the fire, gave her broth and blankets, and watched as she tried not to cry with the shame of taking charity from a stranger. That's when I knew there was something in her that most folks would never bother to see, a pride that kept her alive when life wanted her gone, a dignity that hunger and cold hadn't managed to steal. She told me her story in fragments over the days that followed, words spilling like water from a cracked jug. Parents gone, no family to claim her, years of drifting from place to place, taking whatever work she could to stay alive, and all the while carrying the scars of men's cruelty like invisible brands. To anyone else she was nothing more than a burden, a girl without prospects, but to me she was something else entirely, and I reckon it surprised me as much as it would have surprised the men laughing in town that morning. What grew between us wasn't sudden like the lightning that forked across the prairie sky. It was slow, steady, like a seed pushing its way through hard earth until one day you looked down and realized it had bloomed. I found myself listening for her voice in the house, watching the way she folded laundry with careful fingers, how she paused to look at the horizon like it carried secrets only she could read. She never asked for more than a place by the fire and work enough to earn her keep, but somewhere along the way, I realized I wanted to give her more than that. I wanted to give her the safety she'd never had, the respect no one else seemed willing to offer, and most of all, I wanted her beside me, not as a servant or a guest but as a partner. And so I asked her, one quiet evening when the wind rattled against the shutters and the smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen, I asked her if she'd consider staying, not just for a season, not just until she found another path, but for good, as my wife. She froze, staring at me like I had spoken a language she'd never heard before, and I'll never forget the tears that filled her eyes, not tears of joy exactly, but tears of fear, of disbelief, of a lifetime of being told she was worth nothing colliding with the possibility that someone thought otherwise. She told me I was mad, that I could have any woman in the county, women with fathers who owned banks and ranches, women with dowries and fine clothes and social standing, and I told her I didn't give a damn about any of that. I told her she was worth more than all of it put together, worth more than every acre I owned, because acres don't keep a man warm at night, acres don't look at him like he's more than the sum of his scars, acres don't teach him the meaning of humility and grace. So when I rode into Willow Creek with her, when the town gathered to laugh and whisper, I knew what they thought of me, but I also knew what they didn't, that their laughter couldn't touch the truth of what I had found. They thought a man's wealth should buy him a wife polished like silver, but I wasn't looking for polish, I was looking for substance, and she had more of it in her little finger than most of those men had in their entire bodies. And though she kept her head down, though I knew the sound of their mockery cut her deeper than she let on, I sat tall in my saddle and let the words come steady. A declaration meant not just for them but for her. They laughed when I chose her, I said, my voice ringing out over the dusty street, but she's worth more than every acre I own. Silence followed, sharp and sudden, the kind of silence that told me I had struck something raw in them, something they hadn't expected. Maybe they thought I'd be embarrassed, that I'd shrink under their laughter, but instead I gave them truth, and truth has a way of unsettling men who hide behind mockery. She lifted her head then, just a little, her eyes wide as she looked at me, and I saw in them the faint flicker of something new, not quite belief, not yet, but the fragile beginning of trust. And that was worth more than all the cattle in my pastures, more than the deeds locked away in my strong box, more than the respect of men who measured worth by coin.